Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarian.
Recent Tartarian. Recent Tartarian. Recent Tartarian. Recent Tartarian. Recent Tartarian.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarian.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarian.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the show. Hi. How are you doing? I'm Andreas. The last week has been crazy. I can't believe it. We've gone through strike and unstrike, put on, taken off, removed. People are telling me I'm being set up by this and that. There's like, what kind of racy world are we living in? Whatever happened to just, in the chat, guys, can we all just get along? Do we have to be worried about people coming in and being scared away? I mean, come on. I think we're a bit beyond this, guys. Let's be really guys and gals and everything in between. Let's be safe out there, right? I think is what they said. So I would hope that we're all working together. Please continue to work together. Don't work against each other, and try not to work against yourselves, for the love of God. Okay. Now I want to get into the show. I'm going to start with a little bit of history. No, I'm sorry. I'm not. I'm going to start with a little bit of news. News is becoming really important right now. But I'm going to start with some fake news that's real, that nobody cares about. Let's see if I can get this going. Exclusive: Bill Gates poured millions into dark money fund attacking Elon Musk. See, so imagine that everybody is the same, and it doesn't matter how much money you don't have, you still act like these terrible people. That's pretty sad. Let's try to behave ourselves not like Elon Musk and Bill Gates right now, which is this airing of dirty laundry kind of thing. But yeah, no, I mean, this is something that Bill Gates does to people. Apparently has been, the stories have gone on for years. The man has put information out there to make other people look bad. He's bought their companies, parent companies. He's bought the property underneath people. He's destroyed everyone he can, but he couldn't destroy, Bill couldn't destroy Elon Musk. And in the sense that, usually like Trump or Bill Gates, they see somebody's building and they're like, I want to make sure that guy's building is emptied out by the end of the year, or month or whatever, because it's too tall in my town. This has happened to a lot of people. But Elon Musk was able to force his hand in so many fields. And he had good public optics, which Bill Gates was starting to lose good public optics and had his own problems at the time. Over the last 10 years, it's been really, one thing after another. Bill Gates involved with Epstein, involved with this and that, and his involvement with charities that are doing mosquito research and everything. I mean, nothing about the guy's record looks good right now. And so, of course, Elon Musk, a dude whose family lost everything when their mines were taken away, everything but a few $1 billion. Their mines were taken by the states of wherever. I forget now if it's not Rhodesia, if it was lower than south of Rhodesia. But, now he's got some public optics. He controls a media company. He'll be able to tell people that he's a good guy, and people will probably let the governments of the countries give him back his family mines. And so I kind of think what the optics are going on here. But you can see there's these 26 anti-Musk organizations received funding from a Gates-backed entity. So looking into this, money into making people look bad, yeah, this is a huge thing in the world. People will make anybody who's trying to make a difference look bad. Doesn't mean that those people are perfect people either. I mean, to make someone look bad, and you just have to point out parts of that person because no person's perfect. Okay. Seth Green's Bored Ape NFT, which was set to star in its own animated show, was stolen through a phishing scam. Green no longer owns the commercial rights to the NFT, and thus the show cannot move forward. This guy had some Bored Apes, and it was just so funny. He's like, oh man, I got into a phishing scheme. I was going to use them in some sort of a cartoon. The new trailer for his oh, that was very loud. Let me see if I can turn down the sound just to get the point. Here's going to be whatever. The NFT was going to be in his show, I guess. They were going to animate the NFT. He was going to have the rights to it because he owned the NFT. But he can't now because he lost the NFT. He's going to be trying to get it back because they've got all sorts of records of who now owns the NFT, right? It's like a car with a license, so they can find it. Well, friends, it happened to me. Got fished and had 4 NFTs stolen. Bored Ape YC, OpenSea, Doodles, Yuga Labs. Please don't buy or trade these while I'm working to resolve. Darkwing84, looks like you bought my stolen ape. Hit me up if we can fix it. So we can fix it. So, flipped for $42,000. This is just this is kind of funny because this is the first time that we've seen something right in public that shows how ridiculous this is, legislatively. Because in terms of property, it all comes down to court. And if this person can knowingly, remember, ignorance is no excuse. So Seth Green pushed the buttons and he was fished. Granted, he didn't agree to what he was doing. That doesn't really mean anything because he still accepted the benefit of the opportunity. So according to the commercial code, I think you could argue that Seth Green doesn't really own his property anymore because and what kind of property is this anyway? NFTs, kind of crazy. OpenSea. Oh, wait. Is there a comment from OpenSea? Did I miss that? I'm sorry, BuzzFeed. I try to get off of what BuzzFeed as quickly as possible. The story has been updated to include a comment from OpenSea. OpenSea is currently facing... OpenSea said it has frozen the tokens as it previously done when assets were reported stolen. So, yeah, I don't think it's really going to matter at the end of the day. It's going to all go back to the way it was meant to be, Iraqi citizen who entered the U.S. in September 2020 allegedly plotted to kill former President George W. Bush, even traveling to Dallas to surveil Bush's home, according to FBI search warrant affidavit. I don't know much about what's going on here. ISIS operative in U.S. This is old news, really. I don't know how it's going to really tie into anything that we need to know about right now. The thing that was interesting was George Bush accidentally said Iraq. So this was interesting. The other day he said George Bush accidentally called his invasion of Iraq wholly unjustified because he meant to say Ukraine's invasion by Putin was wholly unjustified, but it was exactly the same thing as what happened in Iraq. And then he said the name Iraq instead of Ukraine, and he takes 3 to 4 seconds, corrects himself, and then he says Iraq too, though. And it's interesting that he says Iraq too, because it doesn't come off like he was talking about Saddam. It doesn't come off like he was talking about Saddam Hussein. It sounds like he was talking about himself and saying that his invasion of Iraq was unjustified. I think it's right here. I don't know if you can... I don't know. I'm not sure. Actually, I'm not sure if I've set up sound to work through the system. So, yeah, pretty crazy that he called himself, the most brutal, unjustified invader of Iraq in history. Nice. So Russia forces have increased the intensity of attacks in Donbass, according to intelligence. So Donbass is still going on. Yesterday, I had said on the Base AF podcast with Adam Crickler that the war was pretty close to ending or almost over, but it's important to remember there are still a few places that they're saying the Ukrainians are trying to return to fighting in. However, I wanted to point out, well, I'll get into the Chinese story in a second. Where did I put this? Oh, man, I just really want to skip ahead, don't I? There's just no way out of it. Okay, here we go. Russia-Ukraine war, 48 more Russian soldiers to face war crimes trial. Okay, and this is like, well, what the heck, right? Good or bad or, Russia wants to organize tribunals for Ukraine. This is first. And so what ends up going on is they've taken a bunch of Azov fighters, checked them for hate crime tattoos, and brought them to Russia for tribunals. Now, however you feel about Russia, this is them saying what they said from the beginning and committing to it. They're like, no, we really don't like these dudes on the East Coast that are messing with, not coast, but east side of Ukraine that are messing with the Russian nationalists or nationals, whichever, and both. And so they arrested these guys. And it's with the aid of Zelensky from Ukraine. The Ukrainian president evacuated, he said, these people for the tribunals, right? So he said, okay, well, if you guys are really that bad, maybe we should go through a tribunal case. But the thing is, it's not that he really wanted to do that, obviously. It was like Russia demanded it, and he had no choice. So you look again at, the next day, literally the next day, then Russia, Ukraine is taking Russians, 48 of them, to face war crimes with 13,000 alleged offenses to be investigated. So 48 more Russian soldiers is not as many as the 1,000 or hundreds to thousands of Azov battalions that are being taken in. So it's definitely more like a show of force or something, but That's not much force. It's just saying, hey, whatever, we don't like you. So, okay, the other thing is Biden says his Taiwan comments don't reflect a change in U.S. policy. This is the real story. China and Russian nuclear bombers fly over the Sea of Japan as Joe Biden visits Tokyo. Just to make it very clear to everyone, they make this demonstrative show of force, not to need to use them this day or anything, but they're just saying, hey, you're in our territory now. And Tokyo is not technically in China's territory, but they're saying it will be soon, and that's a much stronger thing to put their bombers in the sea over than Taiwan. But then this all comes after the conversation that Biden had. He constantly will say something and walk it back, so he's notoriously saying the opposite of what is the policy. I don't mean that like a criticism at all. I mean that more like it's like a weather prediction. If he says something, the opposite will happen. So that's okay. You know exactly what will happen. You can almost trust him for as far as you can throw him. It's just the same with anybody, any politician. But Biden walks back bombshell Taiwan comments for third time. Biden has walked back Taiwan defense promises 3 times. And so this concept was that, and we'll go back to this idea that in the 60s and 70s, China was considered to be the Taiwan government. PRC was considered to be an illegal government up until the 70s. In the 50s and 60s, it was not accepted. And the UN, as well as the United States, accepted Taiwan as an official country. And Taiwan was on the permanent board of the United Nations. So you had the Russian chair that was a permanent Soviet chair. You had the United States chair, permanent chair. Britain had a permanent royal chair. And then you had China, which, the Asia, the Oriental, whatever they wanted to call it at the time, they said, well, China represents this. And it wasn't Tokyo, it was Taiwan. And so it could have been Japan after the war, but we'd made it clear it was going to be China. And so China is a big country. But as time went on, more and more of the country was under the control of this other group, the PRC, the Mao Zedong group, and they had forced the government of China, the Republic of Taiwan, into the Taiwan Islands when they had originally been in the north. I think was it? Let me look this again to show you guys just like a history of Taiwan. I wanted to say Fu something was the original Fu Shen or something. History. (1987) Porsche martial law for Asian tigers. Basically, as time went on, it became more and more. It became more and more a military state that the United States was supporting, that was worried about the expansion of China, and Western China, Western PRC was becoming more and more powerful and had more. They had taken all of whatever anyone had in China, and they'd burned anything that melted down all the metals and forced everyone into becoming metal workers. And they had done so much to completely change China, right? And even then, Taiwan had been the last place to really hold on to traditional Chinese writing and the traditional Chinese architecture and cities and everything. So Taiwan had been beside itself trying to remain Chinese. Anyway, I guess this isn't the most important part of the story. The thing is that China showed up in the morning. Taiwan showed up. The ambassador showed up in the morning, and they were refused their chair. They saw that someone else from PRC was sitting in the official permanent chair of China, of Taiwan, at the UN. And they're like, what's going on? And then they say, well, you're no longer recognized as being the representative of the Chinese people, of the Chinese state. In fact, the PRC is being recognized as that. So we're giving them your permanent seat. It's not your permanent seat, the permanent seat. Like you could take a permanent seat. Well, it's still a seat, but it's not a permanent person. And then they're saying, well, where do we sit? Well, none of these chairs are for, these are all for states. Taiwan's no longer recognized as a state. This is all overnight, Taiwan is recognized as a trading partner of the U.S. But don't worry, says the U.S., we promise we'll protect you. And that's been literally what's been Taiwan's been holding on to since it's been turned into, they're like, what? We're not a country anymore? Well, we don't recognize you as a country. So Biden's saying, don't worry, we still buy a lot of stuff from you, and we'll protect our trading partner. The United States protects our trading partner. That's something that was being said in the 70s. And so he's still trying to say that. However, this is right also at the beginning of Top Gun 2 is coming out. And the Top Gun movie has a bunch of, Taiwan, the sticker on his jacket, right? Here is the original version of the jacket. Here is the new version of the jacket. Things are changing really quickly. They're removing Taiwan from the jacket, drops Japanese flag and Taiwanese flag from Maverick jacket to appease China. This is literally the new jacket won't have Taiwan or Japan. So there's a lot going on here to appease this idea of China and what they're trying to do. But yeah, so we talked a bit. I forgot if I brought up the drones situation already, but there was drones that were also showing up in the South Chinese Sea, and it was showing that there's maybe millions of drones or hundreds of thousands of drones as opposed to thousands of jets. And so some of these drones will be able to wipe out, if you have 1,000 drones to one plane, yeah, it's going to be amazing when this consumer tech, and we looked at drones in Ukraine, but the drones in Ukraine are made in China. So expect this to be a very wild war that's starting right now. I mean, this is, I was saying May, it's nearly the end of May. They've done a lot of their shipments. I think that's what's going to happen. China is going to commit to fulfilling the end of May shipments. And then after that, they're going to try to do this thing. However, it doesn't benefit China to be, and there's so many things going on in China. This is an important thing to remember also. There's like lockdowns, everything. It doesn't really benefit China to be engaged in a war or in a trade cold war either. So it's interesting, and there's still maybe like a 10% chance that something else happens besides invasion of Taiwan. They're literally diplomacy through economics. I mean, it sounds like people still kind of want to do that in China. We'll see how that goes. All right. Let me see. I wanted to pull up some more articles that I had for you that are not news related. Well, okay. We talked before about some things. Let me see if I can catch you guys up on a recap, because that was something someone asked for, a recap the other day. So let me see if I can get this up. We were talking about this idea that ancient Egypt was a place where there was a number of different groups of people, including the Canaanites, and that the Canaanites and the later Hellenistic groups probably had most of their history rewritten in the 19th century. So part of the problem with looking at Egyptian history is that we're looking essentially at mythology from the 19th century. And it makes it really difficult to tell the differences between some stories. One of the interesting stories we talked about was Akhenaten. I'll just really quickly show you the date on Akhenaten to remind you that it's at the exact same time, right? 1300 BC, according to, history, right? Whatever that means. It's at the exact same time as Moses, which we say, 1391, 12. Jerome suggested a little bit later, but it's all the 13th century is most commonly accepted. And this other thing gets more interesting when you look into the Islamic story of Moses, because like Moses and Islam also says some interesting changes in the date. In fact, the Moses Islamic timeline is much shorter between Moses and Christ. It could have been even several generations. And very importantly, you see that most of the writings we have on Moses, including the Torah, were written in Arabic for a while when they didn't have Hebrew script. So you look at Maimonides, and he was a Jewish rabbi in Spain, in the 11th to 12th century AD, who was known as, kind of the Rambam and the doctor, and he did a lot of things that decided a lot of laws over all of this caliphate. But he wrote in Arabic, and most of if you look for Jewish scriptures in Arabic, I found a bunch of these 7 classic Jewish classics written in Arabic. You start to find this connection to the Kitab al-Amanat, and all of these different stories are telling you basically that there's a new language. There's several new languages emerging out of this Aramaic Proto-Semitic language, okay? And then they're becoming eventually Hebrew script. But this takes later. This is later. This is the 15th century. So a lot of the time you've got Arabic scripts originally. So much of what we understand is coming from this Arabic tradition. Now, Proto-Semitic language also matters because not everything's written in hieroglyphics. In these periods, you've got even Proto-Semitic languages at this point, which are, Afro-Asiatic, right? That's going across from Africa into East Asia. But there's also weird connections with some of these languages and what we know from the Western Americas, right? So connections, Western Hemisphere, Afro-Asiatic. And people have been bringing this up for a long time in archaeology. Yeah, gosh, what happened there? Archaeology. Am I doing this wrong? There's the A. Afro-Asiatic homeland is this Uramet hypothetical place where speakers of the Proto-Afro-Asiatic language lived in a single linguistic community or complex communities before the original language dispersed geographically and divided into separate, distinct languages. Okay, and so this region here, which is water-based, it looks like this is where languages are spreading out of. And there's, under here, there's a lot of other areas. We're talking about the Mega Chad, which is a river system that connected all of Africa. Now, mainly in history, we talk about an out-of-Africa theory where people are arriving into Eurasia through Africa. But there's also this idea of let me see if I can find, where did I put the link here? The Western Interior Seaway story, which we explained this before, is supposed to be a long time ago, the Cretaceous Seaway. However, it's admitted that it could have existed up into the most recent period. In which case, that means within the last 10,000 years it melted down. And by saying 10,000 years, we only mean that over the last few thousand years, it would have become completely solid. And this seems crazy, this idea that this area in the United States, we used to have so much water in it, but scientists have confirmed it. The main question is how long ago? And it's very psychologically reasonable to say, well, this must have been so different. Then it had to have been so long ago. And I understand why people do that. But again, a reminder about feedback loops, the Aral Sea. Here's the Aral Sea in 1989 to 2014. So we're looking at the drying up of a lake in a generation, not in millions of years, right? And we start to see this happen everywhere. The way feedback loops is that if this year the rain doesn't land here because it's been divided off and it's been partitioned to go somewhere else, then the water can't continue to rain there and make this feedback loop, which keeps working to keep the lake growing or at least sustaining itself. So there's been examples of this. And then we talk about the changes of, what's it called? The removal of tree deforestation in Europe. Okay. Deforestation in Europe. I should go back further. I'm sorry. Ancient deforestation during the Roman period. And we see this is kind of the way we try to document that there was a Roman period. Now, another thing, people will say Rome hoax, and they'll say Rome doesn't exist, Egypt doesn't exist. Well, the absurd theory that claims that Roman Empire was a hoax. Well, the thing is, they even here they should have said it differently, because the Roman Empire, and that's really where you get into what do they mean when they say the Roman Empire was a hoax? Are we saying that we don't believe that there's a place in Italy that was Etruscan that is now called Rome? No, of course. Rome is a place today. There are places called Rome. But the idea that the Byzantine Empire was Rome, for instance, that the Istanbul Turkish Empire was Rome, and that the area controlled by the Byzantine Empire, because it controlled part of South Rome, then that makes everything else Rome. I mean, this is where we're getting back into this idea that everything is named a thing because it's contemporary. But would you say if the United States continued on for a period and then maybe lost its power, but Canada continued on, would eventually in history we just refer to this as the Western Hemisphere or the North American Empire or something? Because you can see for centuries how there were power in the hands of the United States and then there's power in the hands of Canada. So is it basically all the same thing? Well, no, not technically. And so we've in school already begun saying that this wasn't the Roman Empire, that this was the Byzantine Empire. The question is, what was there before the Byzantine Empire? Was it a Roman Empire? Well, maybe not. Maybe Rome was an important place connected to this trade confederacy around Phoenicia into Alexandria into Carthage. Carthage was probably far more important than Rome was at the time, but they were a maritime trading power. Again, with all this water, we also think that the Suez Canal at one point existed already and that it's been rebuilt. We can see evidence of from Alexandria silting and drying up, similarly to we saw in the Aral Sea, that explains that this was once something you could pass through, whether or not it was natural or someone had built it. So the Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire are entirely different, even if they are in ways confluent. And the true Roman Empire is really just owning, and we've always said this, parts of other empires that existed and parts of the land powers like Carthage that existed. Now, then we get into the stories of ancient Manjaro and the ancient Egypt and how the Egyptians believe they showed up. History of Egypt and their idea. So the fertile banks, and you have this story that they show up after Flood World in Egypt. Okay, and I want to go also to the Canaanite tradition of this. Let me see if I can find the Canaanite page I have open for this. There's Masmet, right? Masmet, I think it's called. Is that wrong? Rainbow goddess. Mesmot, maybe it is. Not just Iris, because Iris comes from this other goddess. Hold on. I know I have it here somewhere. Rainbows in mythology? That might be it over here. Okay. Rainbows in mythology. Is this it? Yes. Okay, so rainbows in mythology, and let's just recap what we know about biblically. The idea that the rainbow is after God said, man, I hate people, or me, I hate man, or something to that effect, I would imagine. And of course, I'm paraphrasing. Or like, gosh, why do they have to be that way, you know? So then, why man gotta be cray till they gotta be gray, I think is what she said. So the rainbow was created as a promise to never do the whole flooding Earth again thing. And everyone, you know, you've got the pride and celebration using the rainbow. Well, it's interesting because originally, the story goes, God was so mad. How mad was God? God was so mad that they destroyed everything, right? They just destroyed everything. And then they let one group of people on a boat save like one of everything that God liked, you know, which was not even everything. Right? I mean, unicorns don't exist now. You know, it's part of the... Somebody's got some stories of that. I think they come in the Bible, unicorns even. So afterwards, Noah is stuck on a boat for a long time, like annually kind of thing. It's like for at least a year, several years waiting. The boat finally lands somewhere, tip of a mountaintop, which they think is in Turkey, right? There's a whole thing on Noah. Hold on. Go back to that. I screwed that up. Noah in Turkey. So Noah's remains ark found in Turkey. This was a thing for a long time. What they say, 13,000 feet at Mount, not Vesuvius, Mount Ararat. That's right, Ararat. So there have been in the 60s and 70s people looking for other places. The expedition team is 99.9% sure. Others aren't, but Christian evangelicals, Mount Ararat. There's a few other stories that you can connect to that are basically all the same. There's another Kilimanjaro, and there's the mountain in Ethiopia. Okay, so also Nile, Ethiopia. go back, and we looked at this earlier, this idea that the Nile that runs into Egypt runs from Ethiopia, and there's these huge waterfalls and these giant mountains and great, it's just their flood season in Egypt that happens every year because of Ethiopia. So there's a few possible places for this idea that there was an ancient world family that escaped with some of their oxen and cattle. Probably not every single tick, but you never know how many ticks get on the back of elephants and whatnot. So who knows? But here's this idea that people told you for a long time in Ethiopia, that they landed here. Not that this was where it originated from. Okay, now we also talked about the Mormons saying Garden Eden location is in Missouri, right? In Jacksonville, Missouri. And everyone thinking, that's crazy. How could that be? That's just the craziest possible thing. Well, again, with the Western Interior Seaway, which ironically, at the exact point, is the perfect. Let's do this. I mean, you see the island of California again. Is land of California. Let me just make sure you get to see the map of the island of California. Okay, this is not a joke. It's literally the same in every way on the island of California. Then you get inland and you see from Texas into this Midland of America, bays, canals, channels, and everything else, right? So then Jacksonville. Well, that was good. Jacksonville, Missouri. Today. So you can kind of have a comparison. Let me pull out just a little bit. Actually, it looks like I'm pulling out a lot. Okay, so you have between the Great Lakes of Chicago and Houston, you have basically a perfect location. Let me go back again. Did I screw that up? No. Western Interior Seaway. It's uncanny, right? Because you've got an island down south of Missouri, and then right where Missouri would be, you've got the Western Interior Seaway. So the Western Interior Seaway made up all of this area, which is now also where the Dust Bowl and the desert and, Kansas. We're not in Kansas anymore. Theosophic Society, Lemuria, the sea, and we talk about all the different whales bones that were found in the Midlands of the United States, as well as in the coast of Africa, along the east coast of Cairo and into Tunisia. So it's interesting also. Then we talked about the natural channels, because there's a natural channel that pulls the water from east of Africa, of Eritrea, that pulls up around the Cape of Africa, and it pulls you towards South America and up, and eventually you end up in America. And they have naturally taken wind ships and shown that this happens, that if following the natural current, if you go down the south, it'll just pull you around Africa super fast, and then it'll jet you off towards North America. Or you could pull back up and go through the south. You could also do the same thing going the other direction. So there's a number of stories from the Mormons that sort of suggest this, that people came from the Western Interior Seaway after some sort of a major flood. And that's interesting, because that's the same story that the Mormons have, essentially, of the Egyptian myth, okay? And now let's get into the Egyptian myth a bit more, because Manzat, the goddess of Mesopotamia and Elamite, was also used in Egypt and known as in Nippur and Der, up in the areas in Sumer. But she was also called Tirana, perhaps. But Tirana is like interesting, like tyranny and tyrannous. I mean, this name Tar, Tyr, the different uses of vowels that we're not so familiar with how the vowels have changed, but we know in the Bible story, like Abram was his original name. So vowels are very important to later generations. Changing vowels is important. But she's worshipped for this idea that through the world's precise the bow of heaven, the promise, the peace, the ark of, all these things, that it's a compass, right? It's supposed to be a contract, that God will not destroy us by water again. But at the same time, it's said that the next time God destroys us, it'll be by fire. So that's an interesting aspect, that it's not really telling you that God won't destroy you again. It's that God will destroy you by fire next time instead of by water. That water was sort of a, like it'll get worse next time. I think we take that wrong. We miss the point of this story. The other thing that's kind of interesting is DNA and digital Noah's Archive. This idea that it could be that we are the ark. I think a lot of people have like that story, but there's more to physically also a deluge. We know that there's a deluge. We know there's this story from the Epic of Gilgamesh of people surviving in a flood, and landing in these different places and trying to figure out how it could have been if they ended up, if they had gone exactly in reverse around Africa, starting in Native America after the flood. And we know that at the time, we also look at the comet of 1811, and we talked about this a bit, that during the comet of 1811, which probably repeats itself more often, 3096, than people realize, that this comet was during a period when water was running backwards, right? That the rivers were running backwards, the Mississippi was flowing the wrong direction, earthquakes were happening. So if everything is reversed for a period, we know that this is a story that the poles have shifted, that everything is backwards. If they ended up in Egypt, coming out of the place, is that a possible story? Well, let me see if I can find what I was reading earlier. I have something here. The Egyptian flood myth, the annual flooding. Do I have the right? Yeah. The annual flooding. Oh, and someone sent a super chat, so I better check that out. Sticky Marks. Thanks a lot, Sticky Marks. It's £5. See, I'm all about the pounds. And David Hestron. How can an entire ark fit in a turkey? Ugh! David Hestron, that's pretty good. I like that one. Let me just check and make sure I didn't miss anything, 'cause sometimes I don't think about this. I might start doing like also a thing where I have like a time to make sure I don't miss super chat. And you'd be like, oh yeah, super chat now. But I think it's like the idea is I should recognize super chats and just start to go with them. Someone asked me to do tachyons. I have a whole bunch of stuff open on tachyons, but I'm going to bring on also my friend Jeremiah, the technician, who's a brilliant Tesla genius. He's been on my channel before, and he's going to help me talk about some of those things to get the tachyon stories correct. I want to make sure that they're pretty interesting and correct, because tachyons, for those who don't know, it's like a thing that scientists don't like to talk about, because the idea that something moves faster than the speed of light is confusing to ignorant people who don't know that light doesn't move at a consistent speed and that we can change it. However, that's mainstream science and accepted, so it's not even like a crazy like countercultural thing. It's just people haven't used lenses and lasers before. All right. Egyptian flood myth. The annual flooding of the Nile was central to Egyptian life and the region. The Egyptian version has striking similarities to other flood myths. In other words, we think that this probably came from Canaan, or ended up in Egypt second, including the one we're all familiar with in the West. Off the top of my head, a god, Ra, I think, gets angry at humanity and unleashes the flood, but he relents and ends up making beer for all the people. There's something in the Bible about Noah having wine after the flood. So there is a connection there. The Indonesians also have a story similar to that they had to make beer for the gods because the gods were weeping and so angry and sad, or there's a whole bunch of, they're like, we got to really like cheer up these gods, And that was a similar myth in Indonesia around those places that have had volcanic resets as well. And so there's been an ancient Egyptian myth and literature of the heavenly cow. There we go. That was the thing I should have. Let me see if I can pull this guy up for you guys. Where's my... I need a third monitor. I mean, a second monitor would even be better than nothing. All right. UCLA Encyclopedia Egyptology, Myth of the Heavenly Cow. So when you start looking at the myth of the heavenly cow, the conventional title of the Egyptian mythological narrative relates how humanity once rebelled against the sun god and how thereupon the sun god reorganized the cosmos. The narrative is embedded in the so-called Book of the Heavenly Cow, which is preserved in several versions of the New Kingdom. It is an etiological myth explaining the origin of certain natural phenomena. Okay, and then we talked about the golden calf Hathor. In Egyptian myth, Hathor is a goddess right? And she's also represented as the milk-bearing calf, and golden, and so much of the Baal mythology and everything, that it's a misunderstanding of Hathor, but also that Hathor Temple, let's do this, Hathor Temple, Haaretz, is that not what I was looking at? I always forget. There, Haaretz, not eats. Okay, so then you start getting into Hathor, and you find Hathor is associated with Ashara as well, and that there was this, that all of these temples are built upon these mines that were built to Hathor, right? And so we're finding out carved dolmen, more than 4,000-year-old Golan rewrites history of civilization. Flint sickles prove grain cultivation in Galilee 23,000 years ago, maybe, I don't know. But in terms of resets, who knows? What we have in between resets is the thing. So come on, golden one, who eats of praise because of the flood of her desire is dancing. Who shines on the festival at the time of lightning? Who is content with the dancing at night? Come, the procession is in place of inebriation, the hall of traveling through the marshes. Its performance is set. Its order is in effect without anything in it lacking. Okay, and so we find all these examples of Hathor in the Sinai Peninsula. And the Sinai Peninsula is that area we were saying that you used to be able to come one area to the other and just cross and go around Africa until it gets silted. And all of a sudden, it's more difficult to get a boat across here. So people on boat on one side and don't boat on the other side for a period of time. Who knows how many generations. And you see the blue skin, the giant foot of Baal or Zeus found in Israel. So there's so much of these ideas of this Zeus-like god who's associated with Ashara. And that this has become in Egypt the story of Hathor and Osiris, or something to that effect. Also, the Baal statue story, you find that this heavenly cow is protecting us, protecting the sky from falling down on us. Their version of the story, the sky opens up. Noah has the same story as the sky opens up. Well, Hathor pokes the sky. So there's a lot of connections to the golden calf before Moses being important, being the reason for this reset, and that the Hathor is, or Cathor is H-or-K. They're both characters that the same character represents in the masculine tradition Moses, this horned guy. All right, well, remember horned Moses, who protected the people, and he starts to emerge. Horned Moses emerges, representing this replacement of Hathor. And you see this happen a few times over. Also think of Dionysus and Hestia in the Roman traditions. So you get the feeling that some of this is actually happening at the same time, and that we're just seeing manipulation of history over and over again. But the culturally, you have this goddess Hestia who's in charge. She has her Mount Olympus throne. Finally, it's taken from her by Dionysus. And I forget the exact, maybe I should find the story. I think it's because she was doing something. She was off trying to help humans or something like that. And while she was out of her chair, Dionysus took her chair and threatened to kill all the gods if he didn't get to keep her spot. It was a very Anakin council kind of moment. He was like, I want to be in charge of the council. And that's how Dionysus Bacchus took over the council. And then Hestia, she ended up, someone's interviewed a goddess. Hestia lost her seat, and so she became the symbol of the fireplace and the hearth. And now, to worship her, you have to light a fire in your home, the protector of the hearth, because she no longer has her place on Mount Olympus. So, similar, there's a number of these stories all around the area of the goddess losing her power, of the relationship between Ashana and Elohim ending. And it's kind of interesting, the divorced god. Okay, so now we also talked a bit about Noah and Joseph. I'm gonna save this stuff, the particle stuff, for another episode, I think. Let me get to Joseph. Gospel of the Ebionites. We could do the Gospel of the Ebionites a bit. Where's that? There it is. Gospel of the Ebionites. Conventional name given by scholars for an apocryphal gospel. This is something we talked about for a second last time because we were saying, hey, look at the Jehovah's Witness. And the Jehovah's Witness have based their stuff on the Adventists, and the Adventists are basing their stuff on the Ebionites. So who are the Ebionites? Well, the Ebionites were a Jewish group that converted to Christianity, but were basically still Jewish. And they were vegetarians. They were against wealth. They were very different than the Christians of today. And you can see, we also talked about Moses before, bringing his characters out of Egypt, how they de-Egyptianized the Jews, right? Well, the Ebionites are part of the process of the de-Jewification of the Christians because they removed the Ebionites from Paulatians. Big thing about the Ebionites, they rejected Paul. They said Paul was not accurate, that he was not, his word to his cities weren't important. And this came up in a talk that I'm doing with Ewan Jr. soon, is Ephesus, the city in Selçuk, Turkey, right? Well, this is supposed to be where Paul wrote his letter to Ephesians, but it's generally accepted now by non-Christians, I guess, and even some Christians who can admit this, that this might not have actually been Paul, that the letters to Ephesians might have been, let me see if did I find this, because they're Ephesians, come on, they don't want to put it here. This has been challenged by Deuteropauline epistles, that is, pseudepigraphia written in Paul's name by a later author, strongly influenced by Paul's thought, probably by a loyal disciple to sum up Paul's teachings and to apply it to new situations. And you have to wonder, when and why did they start saying Paul didn't write this letter to the Ephesians? Well, mainly because it implicates a lot about Rome. It implicates more about Turkey and Istanbul than Rome, because it says the Byzantine Empire isn't so Roman after all, that we can start to admit that the Eastern Roman Empire is Byzantine. It's a Turkish empire or something to that effect. And in Selçuk we see, these ruins, which are definitely cleaned up and fancy. So there's something to be said about Turkey. Turkey tends to come up more and more and more as being the center of something that is getting credit in Rome for happening. Okay, so I wanted to show you that. Then, also in terms of recovery from information, and this could have been, everyone, even if you've got a non-heliocentric model, if you're talking about the extra islands theory, right? Let me see if I can just, people love this, right? There's more continents, right? That's like, they've got this whole thing that beyond these, there's more and more and more, right? Well, that's not any different, really, than what a lot of people have been saying about expanding Earth since, they say the 70s, but really I think it goes back a lot further. Darwin talked about expanding Earth. Everyone had this idea that things are pushing apart, maybe because they're getting bigger, from our understanding about quantum physics. And granted, that's very limited and pretentious. We don't know for sure what we really understand about quantum physics, but in terms of what we understand about radio, expansion is a real thing, and frequency causes expansion. So even if you have the same amount of particular mass, it might just be getting bigger, and this is represented by this idea that things are getting, the stars are moving further and further away slightly, and we can measure this year after year, these distances, that we expect that represents an expansion. Now, it doesn't, and again, whether it's heliocentric, geocentric, flat Earth, or globe, it's still this idea that things are moving away from each other. So that's been something that's been presented a number of times over, that we might have been pushed apart as time went on. I'm going to also show you the map of Herodotus. And here's his map of the world. And you'll see his map of the world. On one side, you could say it's clearly just Eurasia and Africa, but it is Africa. And he's making Africa look a little weird because it goes down to the Nile and sort of stops, I guess. But that's not really there's, if you think about Africa and what Africa really looks like, hold on, because we make Africa look so small in all of our videos and all of our maps. But Africa really is, weirdly enough, not that different. Oh, where did I put that picture? whatever. You get the point. Herodotus had a map that basically shows Africa as something that has this goes straight down, Madagascar goes straight up, and then across Africa is all connected to Spain. So if Spain's connected to Africa, the entire world is a lot closer at this point. It does sound a bit more like it was a closer distance between places. I mean, even now, we look at it again at Spain and Africa, and it's very close. Okay, I think that kind of covers some of the stuff we covered before. Now we're getting to the most important stuff right now. Joseph Smith's papyri, which we talked about yesterday. Deforestation during the Roman period came up. I want to actually maybe expand on this really quickly. The fact that we know what we know about Turkey because of the removal of, the use of ships, using so much wood, all of the different forests have disappeared. I don't know if you've been to Europe, but they have all these new forests planted, and they're all straight lines of trees. They're just lines of trees. And as you're driving, if you turn your head, because it looks like a big forest, but if you turn your head, you see the space in between every line of trees, and it's just this grid. And you're like, that's not natural. Well, that's because they cut down all the trees, and we know that because there were forests across Europe. And this is a big thing about deforestation we've seen in America, and even before the Columbus period, because of Kansas, these areas that don't have trees, because they've been cut down, wind carries seeds, and then they grow trees. But if you cut the trees down all the time, eventually you have these sand dunes because there's nothing to hold the wind back. And the wind is so powerful in the Midwest that you'll have, this is Tornado Alley. But tornadoes don't just happen in the Midwest. They happen in Asia, they happen in Indonesia, and they happen in Africa as well. So the Joseph Smith papyri, we were looking at the Joseph Smith papyri, and most of it was burned in the Chicago fire. But there are some really interesting scenes that we do have, and they connect with this. The official story is that, well, I keep saying official. I mean, there's two arguments. The Latter-day Saints versus mainstream secular science says, no way, this is not Christian at all. But their understanding of Christian is very different than the Latter-day Saints. The Latter-day Saints believe in multiple gods. The Latter-day Saints accept Egypt as being integral to the culture of Joshua and Joseph and Moses and Abraham and all these characters. And the stories they present really aren't that different from the Egyptian stories. So we found there's a Book of the Dead style document that's slightly revised, slightly different, and it represents the Book of the Dead for Joseph. Joseph is, in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. So something else to consider. I want to just make sure where did I put the... I lose files too quickly. Yeah, Menzat is over here, right? Or Menzat. We talked about Menzat. The connection to Iris and the connection to Egyptian goddesses associated with the rainbow, like Ma'at. Menzat is associated with Ma'at. So, the bow star of the rainbow. Rainbow being an important aspect because of Joseph. Dreamcoat. The Dreamcoat was not just made with the colors of Levi, but it was made with the colors of the world, and this idea that he had this rainbow coat that was given to him because he was beyond just the tribe of Levi. He's supposed to unite the world. So this is interesting because you also have the story of the flood that had happened in, I think Abraham meets Noah in the Midrash. So it's this idea that Abraham realizes he's the descendant of his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather Noah, and really he's going to be his son will be the leader of all the world. So it is all about that covenant between the goddess, not just with God, but with the goddess. And so much of the Bible, you see the plurality of gods, in terms of the Babylonian myth, right? Which is during Abraham's elderly part of his life. Babylon, Exodus, right? Is it in Exodus? Or is it earlier than Exodus? No, it's in Genesis. Ugh. Where is this at? Let us, I think, is let us build ourselves a city. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language. Okay? So humans say, let us, because humanity. And then gods say, let us, as in the Godhead. So this idea is a plurality of gods. Now, you can look at that however you want, whether it means that we get into the mind uploading thing again, and we start to talk about this idea that there's a avatar source for the energy that is making this happen. Or you can just say, literally, there are other gods involved and goddesses. And that this is what is expressed in the Book of Enoch and some of the books that have been expanded by Joseph Smith, right? So the thing about that, though, let me get back to my Joseph Smith page. There we go. In the Joseph Smith reconstructed papyri, he wasn't able to get out all of the book. He gets out the Book of Abraham to some extent, and it's only, we think that this was probably a tenth of the pages, and he got killed before it was completely released. But that there might have been more he'd already translated. But still, this is a decent amount of translation of the Book of Abraham. I forget if it's 20 pages or less or something like that. So there's only so much of it that they've really put out. But you see this manuscript, page 3, and it tells the story of Abraham and his sons, and his wife and his slave, his firstborn and his secondborn, and how he nearly gets sacrificed to an Egyptian god and for these Egyptian priests, and the continuation until Joseph, son of Isaac, right? Is that right? I think that's right. Or is it Jacob? Son of Jacob. And so these generations also lived for a lot longer, like 200 years. But then it gets to the story of Joseph. And Joseph's book is never fully released, but we see vignettes that we think are from the book of Joseph in the scrolls. The walking snake that is talking to this man, something kind of unusual. And we've been looking for any evidence we have on the Joseph book, because it seems like everything we're getting to comes back to the Joseph book, the book that tells us whether or not the Egyptian royal families really considered themselves connected, or how connected how authentic is the story of Moses being in the Egyptian court, being a nobleman, because the Bible tells us that he's raised by the Egyptian pharaoh, and everything that we need to know about this comes down to Joseph. Well, then I found some paperwork that was of the mummies, and we talked about that yesterday, that there were these mummies that were purchased with the scrolls, and Joseph Smith claimed that the mummy's name was Yuya. And so we went and we looked into Yuya, and this is something we ended with yesterday, that Yuya, being Joseph in the 18th dynasty, was probably actually just before the 20th dynasty. The 18th dynasty is maybe the real dynasty, and that most of history is made up anyway. But Yuya being Joseph. And Joseph is then, he marries his royal wife Tai. He marries his royal wife Thuya, and Thuya is an actual Egyptian noblewoman, and between the two of them, they produce Tai, and Tai, who looks like Obama's wife, is the mother of Akhenaten. And so Akhenaten is the Moses character. If you follow the same story, it could be also that he's not genetically descendant of Akhenaten, or that of Tai. It could be that but there's a lot to connect, that there's a blood relationship between Joseph as Yuya. This is a reason why he was allowed to be Pharaoh himself, because he wasn't technically from the house of Egypt, but he was married into the house. So that was part of this story, that Joseph, who was Joseph, well, he predicted a famine. He predicted a famine that would come after years of plenty. And he said, let me just collect all the grain. I will have the grain ready, and we'll sell it to everybody. And people came through and said, well, we need food. And he's like, okay, well, give me all your money. And then they gave him all their money at a premium, buying the grain, because there's a famine. There's nowhere else to get it. But then he said, well, we'll keep selling grain to these people if they need food, but they don't have any more money. What are they going to take? And they said, well, just sell us your land. And they're like, our land? Well, we need our land to farm with our sheep. And then he's like, well, that's okay. You can continue to use the land. Just pay me a tax. And then they did that because they had no other options. And maybe the next year even, they're back to being poor again. They said, what do we do? It's like, well, sell us your cattle. So you've sold us your land, you'll sell us your cattle, and you'll just be renting your cattle and using our land of the king. And by the end of the 7 years, this pharaoh, this great house in Egypt, had become the only house that owned any property left, right? Through the manipulation of this. And we only know what we know about the famine, but it was suggested that damming up the Nile was done in order to stop the flooding seasons. And without a flooding season, everybody had little water, and they couldn't, and this maybe for 7 years happened. Or maybe he knew of something going on in Ethiopia, and by knowing about what was going on in Ethiopia, he was able to control the future. Just say, hey, there's not going to be a flood. So, also looking at some of the amazing temple art, his temple art on his coffin have ankhs with royal scepters, the royal scepter that Moses used, the important royal Egyptian scepter, and these sort of power ankh totems that are all along it. So it also is insinuated the connection that he's a priest. And then you look at his actual mummy. His mummy does look a bit more Semitic than just Afro-Asiatic. So it's kind of interesting, this whole idea that this tomb might have been actually of the patriarch of the Israelite families, and led to Moses being important, and also to the enslavement of the Hyksos people. It all might come back to this book. So what do we know about the book of Joseph? Can we find any copies of the book of Joseph? Well, because it was destroyed, theoretically, we lost the actual scroll in the fire. It's going to be almost impossible to find the full writings, but there are some evidences that he might have translated it before he died, and that somebody might have it somewhere, or that it might have been lost somewhere, which would make the most sense to me is that it would be lost somewhere, because by now you'd think somebody somewhere would have published the scroll of Joseph. What we do, though, see again is the idea of him dealing with the royal house, interacting with the devil, and this also the city coming to the power totem. And this just, the idea that this is Egypt in this period. So, Crowder's connection of the vignettes to the book of Joseph. Tanner responds, I didn't want the suggestion to be made that the information to get out, so I wouldn't say that if I were to anybody, but just for your own curiosity, look at it. Let me see, going up here a bit. Crowdery. The representation of the Godhead 3, yet in one, is curiously drawn to give simply, though impressively, the writer's view of that exalted personage, the serpent, represented as walking or formed in a manner to be able to walk, standing in front and near a female figure, and is to me one of Enoch's pillars, as mentioned by Josephus, and is upon the same role. I might continue my communication to a great length upon the different figures and character represent upon the two roles, but I have no doubt my subject has already become sufficiently prolix for your patience. Well, yeah, I kind of feel like that too. The reason I bring this up is because, okay, well, this is just really troubling, right? Like we're looking for this book. It seems like all of the evidence we need is going to come from the Joseph book. But then what do we have if there's no Joseph book? So then we get into Ptah-hotep. And Ptah-hotep is interesting because we say, oh, Ptah-hotep must have been super old. He must have gone back way long time ago. But then we start looking at evidence of how these dynasties are stacked on top of each other, and that most of this stuff that we think happened over thousands of years really happened over a shorter period in Egyptian history. Ptah-hotep was the city administrator and vizier, the first minister during the reign of Pharaoh Assesi, Djekari Assesi, in the 5th dynasty. And when you start looking into Assesi, he actually seems like he might have been Ramesses, or he might have been Amenhotep in the late. We just compare them at a later point, but he might have been just before Akhenaten, and it makes the most sense. So you've got this character that could have been Joseph as Ptah-hotep, and he had a son named Akhenhotep, who was also a vizier, and his descendants were buried in Saqqara. All right, and Saqqara is the step pyramid, which is the ziggurat. So when you get, I think there's a lot to be connected here between Ptah-hotep and Joseph. He had a rainbow coat. He was following in the He's following in the traditions of Manzat, the goddess, and Iris. I keep wanting to say Iris, but Iris is the Hellenistic name for it. But then again, what's the matter? Could all be a bunch of things. Earlier today, if you guys didn't notice, I put out a video this morning that is a video of the words of the divine maxims of Ptah-hotep. And I think that is kind of your book of Joseph. Now, even if it's not, it's a great book because it tells you a lot of important things. But the divine maxims, why I'm connecting them to Joseph and to Moses later, because you have to remember, Joseph comes before Moses, right? Joseph is a priest in charge of Egypt before Moses. The Maxim of Ptah-hotep is a really big book of about 20, 30 pages. I mean, it's a scroll, 20, 30 feet of scroll, really, but it's double-sided. And it has a bunch of laws written into the laws of Ptah-hotep. Did I actually close it? I guess when you push the button. No, we're good. Okay. Do not slander, do not lie, do not cheat, do not covet your neighbor's oxen. Great is the law. There are some things in here that are, there's like 42 maxims, maybe 43 or 44 if you count some of the more ideological concepts as two. But the divine maxims have some maxims that are in the 10 commandments. About 10 of the 10 commandments are 10 of the 42 divine maxims, and they make their way into the Book of the Dead. So over and over again, we see the importance of these laws. They might even be older than this character, but they might have been rewritten properly by Ptah-hotep at a certain point. And he says, instead of like, thou shalt not steal, divine maxims, Ptah-hotep. I wanted to see them written just normally. I've done my video, and it's right there. Great. Somebody sees it. Where is it written? No. I want to see it. So it's written 18 pages, 37 maxims, 42 maxims. Everybody argues on this point. I have not is the way it tends to write a thing. Maxim 1, and be not proud because thou art learned. Maxim 2 and 3 discuss how to debate with a superior, with an equal and an inferior. Maxim 5 talk about how to be gracious leader and making sure that thine own conduct be without defect. Great is truth. Maxim 6 advises us not to spread fear amongst humankind or God will punish. There's a bunch of stuff here, and you can watch my video that is literally just all of the divine maxims. But I will not, I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not forsaken the gods, I haven't cheated, I haven't coveted or shown envy. I've respected the traditions or rules that have been set out. And it's interesting because it's written in a position to whatever God you believe in. And that's something that's kind of, it fits with both the fact that Joseph is in Egypt, changing his name, becoming a vizier, working for the pharaoh, writing for people that don't necessarily believe in his God, and they believe in a bunch of different gods. So he's saying, okay, well, whatever you believe in, don't steal from them. Whatever temple, don't steal from that temple, right? But also, he gets into idolatry, which is not what most Egyptian books would be about, saying that there's something wrong with idolatry. And there's very little about the role the gods must play. And there's almost nothing about what the role the gods must play. It's designed to be read by these sort of Atenists that you see emerge later. Now we see the flamenco timeline line up with this idea that there is 1,000 years earlier than Ptah-hotep, another henotheistic, monotheistic cult that arrives. So they probably are either the same, or there's a resurgence of them, or it's literally it's the same thing. It's been written about by Greeks. If you can call the Hellenistic period real, it's probably more like the 15th century. You have groups that are writing about these, and they're saying, okay, well, this is what happened, and it must have been a different event because the names are slightly different, even though there might be 6 to 16 conjugations of their name. So if we have a true connection here between Ptah-hotep and Joseph, Hotep, you start to see Joey, Yo, and the Y sound end up connection to everything. I think we actually might have the actual book of Joseph, even without Joseph Smith, translating it, because Joseph Smith got a copy of the scroll, remember, from a tomb robber, Limbello, and he had access to other scrolls. So all these things are sort of emerging at the same time. And again, they point out to these other scrolls and say, well, this scroll is, it's written in the same font, in the same hieroglyph. It's about the Book of the Dead, because we're using all the rituals of the Book of the Dead. Who are the priests who were in charge of these things? Osarseph, Joseph, Hotep. I mean, Ptah-hotep could really be someone who wore the Manzet goddess tribal rainbow. Okay. I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say about the rainbow, though. I think I don't want to go too deep into this today, because if I go too far every time with the video, then people can't follow me. So I'm going to be careful with that. Let me just really quickly check some of the messages. Like that you guys are watching this stuff. Benevolent Dreams, thanks for being here. Everybody, make sure you're being careful with chat. I want chat to be a nice place. I don't want to have to clean the house in here. So everybody behave themselves. And yeah, I will do another talk more on Egypt connecting to the Ark, but I think what I need to do is I need to research a little bit more into Turkey and Ararat, the Mount Ararat story. There's a documentary that's from the 70s I saw when I was younger, like probably like 6 to 8, that was on the neo-Christian fundamentalists who went to Ararat and all the stories. And it's pretty convincing at 13,000 feet, but you have to remember there's about 9 other stories. Then the other thing is the 13,000 foot elevation mountains are each one of them, right? You have a group of people that live there that say they survived the end of the world. So something to look into there. Let me see. I think that's good. Guys, make sure you check out make sure you saw the Base AF show. Oh, there's going to be, there's the new video that came out today, which is the Ptah-hotep scripture, which is the Divine Maxims. I'm having a talk with David Ewing Jr. I think I'll put that up again on Friday. So that'll be the third talk with Ewing Jr. And I think that's good for now. I'm going to try to have a few more interviews with people over the week, so enjoy those as well. Check out Twitter. Thanks a lot, guys. Take care. Oh, and make sure I never forget to play this song as the outro. I think I forgot that last time.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians. talk, carry on. We can 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 talk, carry on.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
We can talk, carry on.